My name is Eleanor Harris. I am 70 years old, a retired piano teacher, and the kind of woman who has grown comfortable with silence. My mornings usually begin the same way. The smell of black coffee, the first light spilling through my living room window, and the soft notes of a Schubert piece under my fingers. It is a peaceful rhythm, one I have earned after a lifetime of taking care of everyone else. Last Thursday, that rhythm shattered with a single phone call from my son, David. "Mom, you'll do me a huge favor," he began, the kind of sentence that never ends well. He and his wife, Clara, had planned a 4-day cruise. Apparently, Clara's stepfather, Thomas Caldwell, needed a temporary place to stay because his retirement home was being fumigated. "It's just a few days." "Mom," David said, already assuming my agreement. "He's very polite. You'll hardly notice he's there." I did notice. The moment Thomas arrived, standing tall and formal at my front door with a suitcase and a cane, I knew peace had left my house. His posture was impeccable, his tone precise, his manners old-fashioned to the point of irritation. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Mrs. Harris," he said, as though I were a hotel clerk checking him in. The first evening was painfully stiff. He read a book in absolute silence while I tried to watch my show, the ticking clock between us louder than the TV. I caught him rearranging my spice rack alphabetically, no less, humming under his breath. When I offered tea, he corrected me gently. Earl Grey should never be steeped more than 3 minutes. I remember thinking, this is going to be the longest 4 days of my life. But there was something else, too. Something I didn't want to admit then. A flicker of curiosity about this man who carried himself like the world still expected something from him. I didn't know it yet, but that curiosity would change everything. By the second morning, it was clear that Thomas Caldwell and I were two completely different species. He treated every meal like a seminar and every conversation like a debate. When I made scrambled eggs, he quietly took over the pan and said, "The secret is low heat and patience." When I folded laundry in the living room, he commented on the inefficient technique of my towel rolling. I bit my tongue so hard I nearly drew blood. Still, I couldn't deny his competence. He moved slowly but with purpose, his hands steady as he arranged my kitchen like an orchestra. Everything in its place, every motion deliberate. He reminded me of the kind of men who lived in libraries and believed order was the highest virtue. I, on the other hand, have always found beauty in a little chaos. The paintbrushes left soaking in jars, the sheet music scattered on the piano bench. We shared dinner at opposite ends of the table, our only common ground being silence. Until one evening, he glanced at my piano and said, "You play beautifully." It caught me off guard. "You've been listening?" "It's hard not to," he replied. "You favor Chopin?" My late wife adored him. His voice softened just for a moment, and I saw something behind his formal exterior. Grief, maybe. Or loneliness wearing a suit and tie. I found myself setting an extra place at breakfast the next day, unprompted. The silence between us wasn't as heavy anymore. There was still distance, but something had shifted. A fragile understanding that maybe, beneath our differences, we were two people simply trying to fill the same quiet space. Neither of us knew it then, but our uneasy coexistence was only the beginning of a far more intricate dance, one that would soon turn from irritation to alliance. It was on the third afternoon that I discovered the truth. I had gone into the guest room to bring Thomas some extra towels when I noticed an email left open on Clara's tablet. It was from my son, David. The subject line read, "Let's hope this works." My heart sank before I even finished reading. "Maybe if they get along," Clara had written, "they'll keep each other company. Mom's been too isolated, and Dad's stepfather is too stubborn to accept help. If they connect, it solves both problems." There it was. The real reason Thomas had been sent to me, not because of fumigation or convenience, but because our children had decided that two difficult old people might neutralize each other. A tidy little solution to their messy aging parents. I was still staring at the screen when Thomas appeared behind me. Something wrong? He asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. I turned the tablet toward him. He read in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. When he finished, he exhaled slowly. So, he said, we are a project. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I saw it, the same flicker of indignation I felt burning in my chest. They think we're problems to be managed, I said quietly. Apparently, he replied. They underestimated our capacity for strategy. And just like that, something changed between us. The awkward politeness vanished, replaced by a spark of shared defiance. Two people who had spent their lives being told what was best for them suddenly had a common mission. We could ignore it, I suggested. Or, he countered, a glint of mischief in his eyes. We could teach them a lesson in underestimating their elders. That was the moment our little conspiracy began. Thomas called it a social experiment. I called it payback. Either way, by the next morning, our plan was in motion. We started small. I sent David a short text. Everything's under control now. The situation is evolving. No explanation, no emojis, just enough to make him curious. Within minutes, he replied, Mom, what situation? I didn't answer. The silence, Thomas said. We'll do the rest. That afternoon, we staged our first photograph. The living room half covered in fabric. Paint cans in the background, Thomas holding a measuring tape. The caption read, making some changes around here. I hit send and handed him my phone. You're enjoying this far too much, I told him. He smiled. Revenge, Miss Harris, is most effective when disguised as productivity. While our children stewed in confusion somewhere on their luxury cruise, Thomas and I found ourselves enjoying the process far more than expected. He taught me how to sew proper curtain hems. I taught him how to make apple crumble without turning it into a chemistry experiment. Somewhere between the fabric scissors and the cinnamon, our revenge stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like partnership. That evening, as I played the piano, I heard him humming along, the same Bach piece he'd once corrected me for misplaying. When I stopped, he looked genuinely disappointed. Don't, he said softly. It's been years since music filled a room I was in. The words disarmed me completely. The next day, I sent another text to David. Unexpected connection. We understand each other perfectly. A few minutes later, my phone rang nonstop. I let it ring. Thomas raised his teacup in salute. They're panicking, he said. Good. Maybe they'll finally realize we're not just pieces on their family chessboard. As the sun set that evening, we sat together on the porch, watching the sky fade to gold. What began as a shared act of defiance had turned into something else, an unspoken comfort, a rhythm that felt strangely natural. I glanced at Thomas, the man I dreaded sharing space with only days ago. You know, I said, for a social experiment, this is going surprisingly well. He chuckled, eyes still on the horizon. Careful, Eleanor. We might end up proving their plan worked, just not in the way they intended. By Sunday, the house no longer felt like mine alone. It felt like ours, rearranged, refreshed, and somehow lighter. Thomas suggested we document the progress with a short outing. If we're to maintain our narrative, he said, we should provide visual proof of this supposed connection. I rolled my eyes, but grabbed my keys anyway. We drove toward Lake Champlain, following a winding road framed by maple trees bursting in late autumn color. Thomas narrated the landscape like a scholar on a field trip, naming mountains, reciting bits of history, even quoting poetry when the mood struck him. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. At the lake, we sat on a wooden bench overlooking the still water. I poured hot tea from a thermos while he watched sailboats drift like small white ghosts across the horizon. Clara and I used to come here, he said quietly. She'd bring her cello and I'd read. We thought silence meant contentment. He paused, the breeze tugging at his hair. I suppose it did until she was gone. I wanted to say something comforting, but the truth is, grief recognizes itself. James loved this lake too, I said. He just didn't love boats. I think he was afraid of anything he couldn't control. Thomas nodded knowingly. That fear never really leaves us, does it? We just learn to steer through it. We sat for a long while without speaking. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, like the pause between two movements of a symphony. The air smelled of pine and cold water, the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. When we finally took a selfie, our heads close, the lake shining behind us, Thomas insisted I send it to David with the caption, "An unexpectedly beautiful day." Within seconds, my phone buzzed with 3 missed calls. Thomas laughed, genuinely amused. We've given them quite the storyline, he said. Driving home, the world felt softer. I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. Whatever this was, friendship, companionship, something unnamed, it was real. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread the sound of another voice beside me. Somewhere between the laughter, the quiet, and the autumn light, 2 lonely people had stopped being an arrangement and started becoming a connection neither of us expected. By Monday morning, Thomas and I had grown used to our strange new routine. We cooked breakfast together, finished sewing the last curtain, and shared long conversations over coffee that always drifted from philosophy to childhood memories. But we both knew the game couldn't last forever. David and Clara would be home that evening, and our experiment was about to face its final test. They'll expect disaster, Thomas said as he tightened the last screw on the curtain rod. So let's give them peace instead. That should confuse them more, I grinned. Reverse psychology. I like it. By evening, we'd prepared the perfect setting. Dinner ready, candles lit, the newly redecorated living room glowing in warm light. When the doorbell rang, Thomas whispered, "Curtains up." David entered first, eyes darting around the house as if expecting smoke or chaos. "Mom, you're okay?" he blurted. Behind him, Clara looked equally unsettled. "Your messages worried us," she said. "Fires, unexpected connections, and who redecorated the house?" "That would be us," I answered simply. "Thomas and I, you redecorated together?" David repeated, his voice a mix of disbelief and suspicion. "Since when do you redecorate with strangers?" Thomas smiled mildly. "We thought it might be good practice for cohabitation." The color drained from Clara's face. "Cohabitation?" she stammered. As in 2 competent adults making choices without supervision," I interrupted, my tone even. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas leaned forward, his calm voice filling the space. "We're quite aware of your plan. The cruise, the timing, the little arrangement to see if 2 difficult old people might solve your elder care concerns. Ingenious, really, if somewhat manipulative." David's mouth opened, then closed again. We just thought that we were problems to be managed," I said softly. "Not people to be consulted." The silence that followed was heavier than anger. Clara's eyes welled up. "We just wanted to help," she whispered. "We didn't mean to offend you." "Intent doesn't erase impact," Thomas replied. "You meant well, but you forgot we still have agency. And a sense of humor." David exhaled, the guilt settling in his shoulders. "You're right," he said finally. "We should have asked." "I'm sorry, Mom. And Thomas, I apologize to you too." "Apology accepted," I said, smiling faintly. "And there's something else you should know." I looked at Thomas, who gave a small nod. "Your plan didn't fail entirely. It just succeeded differently than you intended." Thomas lifted his glass in quiet triumph. "We've discovered that 2 supposedly impossible people can, in fact, get along quite well. We've decided to keep seeing each other, on our own terms." David blinked, then laughed nervously. "So you're not mad?" "Oh, we were," I said. "But now we're mostly amused. You see, you wanted to manage our lives. Instead, you reminded us we still own them." Dinner that night turned out far warmer than any of us expected. Once the tension dissolved, laughter returned to the table, tentative at first, then natural. Clara complimented the new curtains. David admitted he'd never seen the house look this bright. Thomas, ever the performer, began telling stories from his years teaching theater. The time an actor fainted mid-soliloquy, the time a cat wandered on stage during Hamlet. By dessert, the air felt light again. When the dishes were cleared, David turned to me. "So what happens now, Mom?" he asked gently. I met his eyes and answered honestly. "Now I keep doing what I've always done, making my own choices. And if that includes seeing Thomas, it'll be because I want to, not because anyone arranged it." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You may rest assured, David. Our intentions are entirely autonomous. We're not eloping, merely exploring." His dry tone earned a reluctant laugh from everyone. The rest of the evening flowed easily. We shared apple crumble, exchanged travel photos, even discussed plans for Thanksgiving next month. Together, this time by mutual choice. When David and Clara finally stood to leave, Clara hugged me tightly. "You really taught us something," she said softly. "We thought we were helping. We didn't realize we were taking over." I smiled. "Help is wonderful," I told her, "as long as it's offered, not imposed." After they left, the house grew quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This was a comfortable stillness, filled with the hum of possibilities. Thomas poured 2 small glasses of wine and handed me one. "Well," he said, "our little performance ended with applause." I laughed unexpectedly. "Yes, and maybe a standing ovation for both of us." We clinked glasses, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Whatever name our connection would eventually take, friendship, companionship, or something more, it didn't need to be defined tonight. What mattered was that it was real and ours alone. Outside, snow began to fall softly across the garden, settling like a blessing on everything it touched. Inside, 2 people who were never meant to meet sat side by side, quietly grateful for a plan that had gone beautifully wrong. When I look back now, I can't help but smile at how it all began. An unwanted guest, a careless plan, and 2 grown children who thought they knew what was best for their parents. They meant well, I believe that. But meaning well isn't the same as respecting someone's independence. Thomas once said something that stayed with me. The worst kind of control is the one disguised as care. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now I understand exactly what he meant. People often wrap their fear and concern, fear that their parents might fall, make mistakes, or simply live differently than they'd prefer. But love without respect quickly turns into management, and no one at any age deserves to be managed. Our children wanted to make our lives easier. Instead, they reminded us we still had a life worth choosing, decorating, and sharing on our own terms. The irony is almost poetic. In trying to teach us responsibility, they learned what it truly means to let go. If you're watching this and you've ever tried to fix someone else's life, especially someone older, pause for a moment. Ask instead of assume. Listen instead of arrange. Because sometimes the best way to love someone is to trust them enough to choose for themselves. And if you're like me, someone who's been labeled stubborn, set in your ways, or too independent, don't apologize for it. Independence is not defiance. It's proof that your story isn't over yet. So tell me, have you ever seen good intentions go terribly wrong? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it. And if this story reminded you of someone you care about, share it with them. Maybe it'll spark a conversation worth having. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simply living well and reminding the world that you still can.